Center stage as this begs the question of one, legal processes that are alleged to have been flouted or undue influence on both sides, as we've heard of the contradicting affidavits. Talk to us about this, Aldrin.
Well, Alicia, coming to you straight from outside the Supreme Court of Appeal, let me tell you this first of all. Breaking news coming out of this court hearing. Oral arguments had been set down for 2 days, but I guess the concessions from both the NPA and now President Jacob Zuma's council has inadvertently stopped arguments from continuing because there was no need to argue anymore. The concession from President Jacob Zuma's lawyers that the decision taken by Mkhothadi back in 2009 was indeed irrational. Just want to bring in James Self from the DA. 9 years ago, when Mkhothadi made this decision, President Jacob Zuma's council welcomed this decision, that the decision to drop the charges were irrational. And even when they wrote to this court, and even in their heads of arguments at the time, they said that had Mkhothadi continued with the prosecution, it would have been irrational. But now, after a heavy debate, and I guess on Epstein, who was representing the NPA, now this concession from President Jacob Zuma's council.
Yes, well, I mean, it should never have taken 8.5 years. It's a colossal waste of time, and even this last case, to have dragged us all the way to Bloemfontein with big legal teams, only to concede that the decision was irrational after all, is, in our view, an abusive process. And there has been abuses of process all the way along. From the time we started, the challenges to our locus standi, the challenges to being able to review a decision of this nature, they were simply delaying tactics to prevent Mr. Jacob Zuma from having his day in court. Well, he's now going to have his day in court.
Well, do you really think that he would have his day in court, considering that the council representing President Kemp is saying that all they are arguing for is that there needs to be representation, that the NPA should afford President Jacob Zuma representation?
Yes, well, every accused person has the right to give representation. That in itself doesn't alter anything. What will come out of this is that charges will be reinstituted, the same charges that he was facing in 2009, and we are hoping that the court will give some clarity about the process going forward, including what sort of process needs to be followed to reinstitute the charges, to secure the attendance of the accused person at court, and so on.
You know, politically speaking, it's mind-boggling just thinking that at some point, probably after the Supreme Court of Appeal's ruling and the deliberations by the NPA, that we would have a president who is an accused, who is facing corruption charges.
Well, yes, it's unusual and it's probably groundbreaking, but this should have happened before he even became the president. Then we would have saved ourselves a great deal of embarrassment as a nation, defending the indefensible.
And considering the money that you yourself as the DA has spent on this case, I heard from some of our colleagues saying that as close to 10 million.
Well, I think it's been worth every penny because not only for securing this particular outcome, but more than anything else, to make sure that the principle of equality before the law is now very firmly located in case law.
And for the DA, what's the plans now?
Well, we will obviously be waiting for the written judgment. We will study that judgment very carefully. We will be very vigilant that there aren't any further delaying tactics or any further semantics that are going to stand in the way of the rule of law being implemented in this particular case, which means that everyone has the same chances, the same opportunities, and the same responsibilities when it comes to obeying the law.
And possibly an application for a permanent stay, if anything.
Well, that's always possible. Anything's possible after 8.5 years, but we'll take it as long as it has to take.
Well, James Self, thank you so much. There you have it from the DA's James Self. 8.5 years that they've been fighting this matter, and finally the concession there out of President Jacob Zuma's council that the decision taken by Mkhothadi at the time to drop the charges against him was irrational. It took 8.5 years for us to get to this point, and as I've indicated before, that this matter had been set down for 2 days here at the Supreme Court of Appeal. But after this concession, as well as a concession by the NPA, saying that Mkhothedi Mshe used the wrong law to drop the charges against President Jacob Zuma. The justices were arguing that an abuse of process could only speak to an abuse of process when it comes to a matter being in front of a court of law. And Mkhothedi Mshe, by his own admission, when he delivered that decision back in 2009 on the 6th of April, said the prosecution itself has not been tainted, but it is the process that has been grossly tainted and seriously tainted by Leonard McCarthy, who was then the Scorpions head. We'll now have to wait and see what the judgment out of this court will be and how the NPA will respond to that judgment and probably implement the charges and recharge President Jacob Zuma. And we've indicated that President Jacob Zuma's council is saying that they want representation. They want President Jacob Zuma to be afforded an opportunity to state his case why these charges against him should not be reinstated, but at a level of the NPA. So everything now back in the NDPP's hands, Sean Abrams, considering these concessions that came out of this courtroom. It's back to you in studio.
So much for that update. Aldrin Sampear at the Appeals Court out in Bloemfontein.